Hi, I'm Dana, and I'm once again coming to you with something I've seen online and just want to put my 2 cents in on, essentially. I've seen at least 10 tweets involving whether or not you should tell your kid they're autistic, and I gotta put my opinion in on this one. As a late diagnosed autistic person, I have to put my little opinion out there on this. So I haven't even made notes for this video because I feel like it's gonna come from the heart, you feel me? Like, this is just gonna be the way it is. So, yes, you absolutely should tell your autistic child they're autistic. What the fuck? I'm sorry. As an autistic adult, I haven't had the best experiences with the parents of autistic children. And as much as I try to keep in mind that most of you are wonderful people that really deeply care about your kids and are trying to understand what it is to be autistic and do what's best for your child, I get that. But there's also a lot of fucking terrible parents that don't really give a shit about their child just because they're autistic and seem to just hate autistic people. So if I get a little shirty, if I get a little controversial, essentially, if I'm a little bit mean, I'm sorry, and it doesn't apply to those of you that are trying to be good people and good parents. It's just that you're unfortunately part of a demographic where the loudest people I've come across have been the worst. So I will make some assumptions. I will assume that you probably don't know many autistic people or much about autism if you're asking this question. And to save myself being a bitch, essentially, I will assume that you're a good person who is trying to do the best thing for your kid and just don't know what the best thing is. So, as I mentioned, I was a late diagnosed autistic person. I didn't receive my diagnosis until I was 21, which meant I was a child that was autistic but didn't know I was autistic. And let me tell you, buddy, it sucked. I spent 21 years of my life wondering why people didn't like me, why I couldn't interact with people the way that everyone else could, why I was so consistently in trouble in school and at home for doing what I thought I was supposed to do, for doing what I thought was following the rules, that later turned out to be not at all what I was supposed to do or not following the rules. You know, I was constantly confused and upset and in distress because I didn't understand what was happening in the world around me. I didn't understand how other people worked, and I didn't feel like anyone understood how I worked or who I was. Lots of things that I was bullied for and picked on for, or picked up myself and then began to feel bad about, were things that are autistic traits. They're things that very easily could have been told to me as, that's just part of your autism, that's part of being autistic for you. And I could have accepted them a lot easier rather than spending years of my life hating myself for them. You know, I spent over a decade, absolutely despising every element of my personality, who I was as a person, the way that I looked, the way I behaved, the way that I acted, the way that I misunderstood everything around me. I despised everything, every aspect of myself, because I knew there was something different and I didn't know what it was. And I was consistently told that there was nothing different, that I was fine and normal and everything should be okay, and I just wasn't trying hard enough, I just wasn't putting my full effort in, I was just doing it on purpose, and it sucked. Not knowing that I was autistic was by far the worst period of my life, and that's really saying something given the year that I've had. That's in another video if you want to stick around. But I don't think that anything positive comes from growing up with the lack of awareness of being autistic. You know, it doesn't take much to think about why people would consider not telling their kids. I understand that you think maybe your child will use it as an excuse, that they'll think that there's something wrong with them because of it, all sorts of stuff. But I assure you that your child is more likely to think that there's something wrong with them if they don't know they're autistic. You know, for me, I'm able to put the word autistic on things now. I understand that about myself. When something comes up, when I'm awkward in a social situation, when I'm experiencing sensory overwhelm, when I have any sort of sensory overload, I don't have to think, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why am I so different to everyone else? All of these horrible negative thoughts don't have to come into my mind, because the one that does is, it's part of being autistic. This is part of being autistic for me. It's not that I'm wrong, it's not that I'm broken, it's not that there's anything that wrong about me or anything that shouldn't be there. It's part of being autistic. And my life would have been significantly easier, my mental health would have been significantly better had I been able to put that label to myself sooner. You know, I understand that children need to be protected. They should be safeguarded from lots of like the horrors and bad things in the world. Being autistic is not a bad thing. Being autistic is not one of the horrors of the world. Being autistic is not something a child needs to be shielded or protected from. I try not to make large sweeping statements about any group of people in my videos, especially autistic people, because we are all extremely different. You know, it is very much a spectrum, and we're all a large combination of different traits and personalities, and we're all very, very different. However, if being autistic is explained to them in the right way, if they are supported without being like favoured and all of that stuff, if they are treated as people and children without necessarily seeing them as being autistic. And I also grew up with an autistic brother, so I know what it looks like when a child is told they're autistic, when a child grows up knowing that they're autistic. And all of the things that I think were negative about his experience from my perspective were things that other people created, you know? I don't speak to my family. I have a lot of very negative opinions on my brother. However, I think a large part of the things I dislike about him come from the way that he was raised, being an autistic kid and being an autistic teenager, because for him it was an excuse. And I'm sure that's what lots of people are worried about when they're thinking whether or not they should tell their kid they're autistic. In school, at home, and anywhere we were, he always had an excuse for poor behaviour. He always had an excuse to not have to try. And it sucked. It sucked for him in future when he suddenly did have to try at things and did have to work hard, and suddenly there wasn't this like just scapegoat answer of, oh, he's autistic. It was bad for me as his sibling. It was bad for his friend. You know, it didn't benefit anyone. Autistic people, for the most part, just need to be treated like people. We may need occasional accommodations. We may need things to make our lives a little bit easier, to put us on the same level as everyone else. But for the most part, we really just need to be treated like people. And I think that a lot of children are let down by being treated as being special. However, I also think that there's far too many accommodations that are seen as special treatment and treating a child in a special way when they are simply accommodations to put us on the same playing field. You know, I can see why there would be negatives to telling a child they're autistic, is what I'm saying. I understand that being the parent of an autistic child cannot be an easy ride. I understand that there's a lot more to it than just, are you going to tell them or not? You know, you have to actually parent that autistic child. However, I think that's going to be a hell of a lot easier if the child knows they're autistic. I think that they're likely to suffer much less. I was going to go into like a whole tangent, but quite frankly, I think they're going to suffer much less. You know, I think that they're going to know themselves better. They're going to understand the reaction that people have to them better. I think that you're preparing them and setting them up to cope with the world and to understand them and accept themselves much more by telling them they're autistic in childhood. Like personally, if I had an autistic child, I would mention it all the time to them, like in their early years, so that they just grow up knowing they're autistic. I wouldn't have a sit down, you know, and this is assuming that I would know from like the moment they're born, which I know isn't the way it tends to go. I understand that for a lot of people, your kid is getting their diagnosis at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it does have to be a sit down, oh, you're autistic. I mean, even then it doesn't though. It doesn't have to be a sit down thing. You can just mention it to them and start mentioning it. I think it should be a completely normalised, ordinary thing, you know? Like, I talk about being autistic quite often to quite a lot of different people that I don't really need to mention it to. And I think some people definitely see it as me sort of being like, I'm special. But in reality, I'm just trying to normalise it. I'm trying to normalise just people saying, oh, I'm autistic, so I struggle with that. Oh, I'm autistic, so I love this thing. You know, I think that the more we normalise it and the more we just talk about it, the better it's going to be to exist in society as an autistic person, the easier it's going to be to accept ourselves and others as autistic people. I think that's the way it should go. I think that we just, all neurodivergencies need to just be accepted, understood a little bit, and accommodated, and just, you know, it doesn't have to be a whole thing, you know? Like, at the end of the day, we're still just fucking people. We're just people whose brains work a little differently. Finally, my final little point. Going from my own personal experience, My brother was able to access a lot of different things that were there for autistic children, which meant that I got to access them and it was a very fun time. But that meant that he was spending time around other autistic children, other children with other neurodivergencies and disabilities, and he got to, really learn how to be around other people with different disabilities and different neurodivergencies. He learned to, and myself, learned to just accept people as they are, because we're all a bit different and a bit quirky and a bit whatever, and you've just got to learn to get on with them or ignore them, But not only did it teach us to get on with different people and to, showed us that different people can be very similar to us while still being very different. It taught us a lot of different things for sure, and it made me feel normal. It was a big one, which my parents should have probably picked up on some things at that point. But if you don't tell your child that they're autistic, they won't have access to those types of things. And even though it wasn't there for me, I wasn't the one that was referred to it, it was my brother, those types of settings benefited me massively. They were some of the happiest moments of my entire childhood, to be honest with you. But even then, I, again, felt othered. But because I didn't know I was autistic, I thought I was a normal kid. So even though these were people that I felt like I belonged with, there were kids that I actually got on with and actually played with and actually enjoyed playing with. There were so many times in school that I'd played with other kids because they'd finally allowed me to, and I was bored and didn't enjoy it in the slightest. This was... Getting to play with the other neurodivergent and disabled kids was an absolute lifeline, and it was incredible and so much fun, and I loved it. But like I was saying, even while around those people, because I didn't know I was autistic, I felt like an outlier, I felt like an alien, I felt like an outsider. So I didn't have anywhere that I felt like I belonged, because I could feel and tell that I didn't belong with the other kids at school. My mum would occasionally have friends that had children, and they quite often just picked on me in my own home. I very much felt like I didn't belong anywhere. But if I'd known I was autistic, if I could have said oh, I'm one of the disabled kids too, I'd have had a community. I'd have had somewhere that I belonged. I'd have had people that understood me and that I understood. And I understand that this isn't going to be something that's accessible to everyone. I don't know how my parents got onto it. I don't know how you find it yourself if you want to take your kid to something similar. I don't know if there's still a thing anymore. This was in the early noughties. But I absolutely think that every autistic kid should, if possible, have the chance to spend time around other neurodivergent and disabled kids, because it is a sense of belonging. But you don't get that sense of belonging if you don't know that you're one of them, I don't understand what it's like to be a parent, I'll give you that. I can only imagine how fucking exhausting and tiring and difficult it is, and that's why I'm not doing it anytime soon. I would not be good at it. And this is purely my thoughts and opinions and what I reckon at this current moment in time. I think everyone knows what's best for their own child. As an autistic person, though, I don't think anyone should be growing up not knowing they're autistic if they have the chance to. I think that as long as you're educating yourself on what it is to be autistic and presenting it to your child as either a completely neutral or a positive thing, not too positive mind, we've been there. I think that as long as you're presenting it to your child as something that is just a neutral fact, just you're autistic and that's completely fine. This is what it might mean for you. Here's some things that we're going to bring in to accommodate, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, you know your kid best, you can guess how they're going to take it, how they would understand it, blah, 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 blah. But I think as long as the parents are putting it to them neutrally as just a fact of life, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it would be a very positive thing. I think I would have benefited positively from growing up knowing I was autistic. And I'm ready to stop talking now because I think I've said everything I wanted to say. I would love to hear any opinions or thoughts on this. If you've, been in the situation, whatever it is, whatever you're thinking. I've just spent a long time telling you all of my thoughts with no experience, so don't feel like you have to be a parent to tell me what you think. And I think it'd probably be really good for any parents that are in this situation to be able to read more opinions than just what I've chatted shit about for the last half an hour, as much as I'm like, my opinion is right, it is just my opinion. It's only my opinion. So, if you haven't subscribed already, it'd be lovely if you did. I post videos pretty much entirely about being autistic at this point, to be honest. I am going to try and delve into some other contents again soon, though. So yeah, like and subscribe, guys. No, but whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And I'll see you again in a couple of days.